May. Well, we are kicking May 2011 right in the pants. Pretty soon, it'll be June.
Yes, yes.
Pretty soon, people will be putting their gardens in. I jumped the gun, already put mine in.
Oh, you have?
I don't know. It just seemed warm enough. The ground seemed warm enough.
Yes, yes.
And so now I just got some beans coming up and some cucumbers coming up, and the tomatoes are looking good.
Yeah, yeah.
We're at the home of Richard Moore on Route 11, Ellenburger Depot. Richard, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You, Gordon?
You know, I'm doing good for an old guy, too. And I walked in the door and I heard you talk for the first time. And when I started in the radio business in 1961, I would have given a right arm for a deep voice like yours. Has your voice always been deep like that?
Yeah, it has, yes.
Wow! I bet when you called the cows, they came a-running.
Yeah, they did.
Did they really? Now, you've been a farmer. You were born, brought up here.
Oh, yeah, just up on Clinton Mills Road where my son lives. That was where I was born, on the Clinton Mills Road. And my father was born there, and he died there. Born there in 1897.
That's what I love about this rural area. People sometimes live in the same house they were born in. All their father was born in the...
Yeah.
So you were born right around the same place? Your father was born there?
Born in the same house my father was,
1897?
Yeah, he was born in
104 years ago?
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't that wonderful?
114 years ago,
114 years ago, of course.
Yeah,
I knew the farmer's math would be better than mine. And
the house and barn both gone now because my son built a new house and had to get rid of the old one, The old house was still in good shape. It was a log house, but it was all clapboarded,
How many houses do you know that happened that way, with logs?
Oh, yes.
And then people driving by, you would never know.
Yeah, that's right.
Up in Lion Mountain Standish, there's lots of
Here's a house that was behind the house that we lived in, and it says there that's where Tom Moore lived for a while. That's a log house, you see,
I can tell. Look at it. Oh, this is beautiful.
But the house that we lived in,
right nearby,
right back at the other house. There used to be 2 or 3 families on one little farm.
Tom and Sarah Moore, right?
Yeah.
Until the 1870s.
Mid-1870s, yeah, that's when he went to Nebraska.
Later, the house of William and Mary Moore.
Yeah.
Until they moved
to Grafton,
Vermont, 1901.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, married in, what is that, 67?
Yes, married in 67.
Oh my.
And the original house was built in 59. That's when they moved over here from Canada, 1859.
Yeah, 59,
1859, yeah.
Don't you love it?
I got a picture of that there too, someplace in the barn too, that was taken a few years
So
ago.
you always lived within, what, 10 miles of where we are right now?
Yeah. Yeah, it was only 5 miles from here to where I was born. Then I just went up the road to Gibson's, Kelly's father, and I worked there for 20 years.
Oh,
just up the road.
Come on, really?
Yeah, then I bought the farm on Canaan here, so I was only 3 miles from home then, And so this is as far as I've ever been.
You never traveled very far?
No, I went to Mexico a few years ago.
Oh, you did?
When my son got married, there was about 14, 15 of us went down on his honeymoon to Cancun.
Oh, come on.
And I know, I thought
wild and crazy party animal.
I thought he might need a little help, but he didn't ask for any.
Yeah, Cancun's a wild place.
Yes, it was. I enjoyed it, Yeah.
So that's the farthest you've been?
Yes, I've been to Florida,
Around, never traveled other overseas? Or?
No, I haven't.
You know what? My wife says every time we go on a trip, we come back and she says, I'm glad we're home. I'd rather be right here.
No place like home.
There is no place like home.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Well, we try to tell people who don't live here how wonderful the North Country is.
Yeah.
5:30 this morning, I was sitting on my back deck 3 feet from the Saranac River with a cup of coffee, of course, in my hand, watching the birds wake up, listening to all the bird songs. And my wife said, why are we going camping up in the St. Lawrence? It's just as beautiful, right?
Yes, it is.
But isn't it great?
Yeah, it is.
We do live in a good part
We do.
A good part of the country. So you were married, what year were you married?
I didn't get married till 74.
74. And your wife passed away how
In
much?
93.
93.
Yeah, she was a divorcee. She had 4 daughters. And then in 75, Richard was born, July 4th. Then
July 4th,
yeah.
fireworks.
Then July 3rd, 2 years later, my daughter was born.
Oh, come on.
So I got a son and daughter, plus 4 stepdaughters, you know.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
everybody knows my story. My wife had 11 kids when I
Yes.
married her.
Yes. Mhm.
So we had the baker's dozen.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
that's what their name was, too, Baker.
It was, eh?
I love it. So here we are. There's a good reason we came here today. First of all, we wanted to meet you.
Yes.
Well, I always said North Country farmers are the salt of the earth. It's hard to keep the small farms going now,
Oh,
you know.
yes, yeah.
You had, what's the most cows you milked, 80?
I had 75.
75?
Yeah, about 140 head, you know.
But now look at some of the mega farms.
Oh, yeah, that's just a hobby farm now, you know.
Is
Really,
it?
you know,
It
really,
is.
you know.
Yeah, we were down in Ellenburger at the FFA,
I saw you up there, yeah.
and we were talking to the kids, and a lot of them live on hobby farms, small farms,
yes, yes.
35, 40, 50 head of cattle, but
Yeah.
it's hard to run a farm like that,
Yeah,
especially if you're doing it to make a living.
It is. Because you buy a tractor, you pay just as much as a guy with 600 cows for a tractor, you know.
Sure.
Same price. But,
Think of what equipment costs.
oh boy.
Calvin and I have been lucky enough to meet some of these mega farmers, and we've seen their equipment, and I just shake my head. Because
Oh.
when I worked on the farm back in the 50s, getting a tractor was a big deal.
Well, yes,
Letting the horses go that way and use them to cultivate
Right.
and get a tractor. That was one tractor. That was a big deal.
You bet. It was.
I have no idea what a Ford or Fortune tractor cost in 1952, but these you couldn't hardly get an
It was-
oil change for some of the things.
It was just in the hundreds of dollars. That's
Isn't
what
it
it was.
amazing?
Yeah, back then. you know.
Truly amazing.
Yeah.
Well, with a name like Moore, you got to be more famous than we're letting on so far. Calvin saw a copy of the North Country Notes, which is a regular publication from the Clinton County Historical Association, and they do a good job in history in this area. And Calvin and I, as you know, spend a lot of time talking about history.
Oh, yes.
We have people around this northern tier, and David Patrick over across the lake in Vermont, who's very, very interested in history, and we've met all the historians, done a lot of history shows. And as it happens, we are in the year of what they call the sesquicentennial, the 150th
Yes.
anniversary of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And Calvin spotted this article about your ancestors
Yeah.
and said, we got to go see Richard. Have you always been interested in the Civil War?
Well, just the last few years, I see now. My father had a great memory, and I see why now I didn't visit with him enough before he went.
Isn't
You
that
know what I
always
mean?
a regret?
That's right. Yeah.
Always a
Yeah.
regret. And isn't it, don't you wish you'd had a recorder to record all the
Yes.
stories?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some people do it now.
Mm.
They'll do it on digital, on tape, and so on. I did it on cassette tape with my dad.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, those people worked hard all their lives, and they didn't talk much about
Yes.
their childhood or their own grandfathers and
Yeah.
so on.
Right.
And I never met my own grandparents, so
Yes.
it's nice to go back and listen to my dad's tapes and
Oh,
see
boy.
what his
you bet.
childhood
Yes.
was like.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
never were able to do that with your dad.
No.
right?
No. I just didn't take the time to go home. We had our life to live, you know. And,
Well, that's a simple way of saying I had to work my butt off to
Well,
get
yeah.
it done. We didn't have a lot of time to
But-
sit down and chat.
we could have took more time what we did to really
Yeah.
look at it now, you know, and found out more things, you know. Of course, his knowledge of his ancestors is a little bit small because his oldest sister was born in 75. He was born in 97, 22 years different. He was the youngest one in the
No,
family.
come on,
Yeah.
really?
And there's about 6 or 7 in between. Yeah, 20. Yeah, his oldest sister had a son born in 97, the same year that her brother was born.
Yes,
you
and
know?
think about it.
Yeah, so he was on the tail end, so some of the older ancestors was gone before he could remember, you know, really, you know.
And that's what happened to my mother's family, come to think of it. They called her Babe. She was the youngest of
Yeah.
7.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
And so that's the same thing happened
That's
in
right.
her family
That's
as
right.
happened in yours.
Yeah.
So when did you start knowing about these famous Civil War people? When did you find out about
This Dallas Briggs from Colorado, he sent a lot of stuff out here. Maybe it's over there.
contacting you?
Oh.
You mean sending you letters?
Well,
and things?
he sent all these descendancy charts here, you know?
Oh my
all the
goodness.
descendancy
come on.
charts. And
To
where-
you? How did he
Yeah.
know you were a relative?
He got talking to Kelly Gibson, and Kelly Gibson said that I was
Leave
related.
it to Kelly to
Yeah,
pass
I
the
related to
word.
Tom Moore, you know, and so those are just and
Just
he,
so you know, this is real stuff. When did this stuff start coming to you?
maybe 97 or 98, sometime along
Well,
in
that's
there.
quite a few years ago.
Yes.
That's when I left radio, 1997. So you started looking this stuff over, and what did you think?
Well, I mean, I was amazed at how he knew so much, you know.
People who get into genealogy are very serious.
Yeah.
Calvin and I have spent time with a genealogical group out in Keysville, and if they're like a hound dog. They get the scent,
Yes,
and they don't give up.
yes.
So you learn more here than you ever.
Oh, yes,
Anybody
yes.
in your family
Yes.
knows,
Now,
probably.
this Dallas Briggs, he's a great grandson of Tom Moore, you know.
Oh.
So-
And you never met this guy.
No.
You never knew who
No,
he was.
I don't know if he'd be still living. He was born in 35. He's a little bit younger than I am. Dallas was
Well.
born in 35, so he might be still living.
So you start getting this information.
Yeah, he just sent all this in here, and
That's probably all on computer now, but
yes.
that's all printed out.
You see, now he got it all coded here too. Like Martha Gray married John Morse, that's my great grandfather. They're number 2. Well, their children are number 3. You see,
My
and,
goodness.
and so number 3, his children is number 4, and their children would be number 5. Yeah. Then here's Walter. He's number 3. Then this is Tom. See their children number 3, and he married a Gibson girl, and their children number 4, and it'd be his grandchildren be number 5. Then their great grandchildren. He's got it all coded here, because
amazing?
you see more than one Thomas Moore, you know.
Oh, sure.
Some uncle would marry his son Tom too, you know. So that's why it's all coded there, you know.
Well, how about the famous Plennymore?
No,
That's something different. No relation to your family at all, huh?
No. I'm not sure.
Some of these names of these people are amazing.
Yes, I know.
Atta, A-T-T-A.
Yes.
Isn't that
Yeah, yeah.
amazing? Alma.
Yeah.
So did you learn something about your great grandparents that you didn't know when you got all this stuff?
Well, yes.
Let me
Yeah,
move the microphone
yeah.
here.
And here's Thomas Moore. These are all his descendants here, and these are all Toms, and these are all Toms. You get down here, and his great-great-grandson, he says, this is me, you know. Dallas, when it did all this, Dallas did, this is all Tom's descendants. And Dallas says, this is me, you know. He was born in 1935, you see.
Oh, there you go.
And these are all Tom's offspring right here, you know. So we got hundreds and hundreds
Well,
of them.
how did this this group find out about you?
I
Dave?
saw an article in the paper they wanted, like some stuff on the Civil War.
I love it.
And so I called them.
Good for you,
and
Richard.
made an appointment. And I took it down and took down these pictures and this.
All that genealogy.
Yeah, and this is from the day they left Plattsburgh until the war was over. Tom wrote
So
that.
Thomas wrote this.
Yeah.
When did he write it? Well, there you go. On the 15th day of September, 1861. I was 16 years
Yes,
old.
yeah.
There you go. Look at this. Just
Right
to look
there it
at
says,
it.
and the Great War was over.
The Great War was
That's
over.
the whole time they spent in the war right there.
How many times have we heard the Great War,
Yes.
the war to end all wars,
That's
and
right.
guess what? They keep going, don't
Yes.
they?
Hmm.
Oh, this is
I see the
wonderful.
Historical Society took a couple pieces out of there and put it in their letter, you
In
know.
their letter, wonderful.
Yeah, they did put
Have
in a
you
couple.
read all this?
Yeah, I've read it 2-3 times, and or a few times.
It's so nice that somebody
Yeah.
kept records like this
Yes.
because it brings that history
They,
right back for us.
I guess it tells in there too that he went down. he was only 16 in September. He went down to Plattsburgh in January, but I guess he couldn't go unless his father signed.
Well, we've heard how many times about lying about their age and then writing these letters home, and they thought it was going to be a real fun thing to get to join the Army. And then after a while, about the first 3 days, the homesickness, and especially the farm boys, it wasn't so much exciting as they thought it was. Because for most of our guys from up here, there was a lot of standing around and waiting.
Yes. But it says there that he went down in January. In March, Walter, the year older, and his father went to Plattsburgh to get him to come back, but they had it made up amongst them, and that if he wouldn't come, Walter was going to go too.
Oh, come on.
The train was pulling out and said Walter jumped on the train. They gave him a suit of uniform on the train.
Isn't that amazing?
And they went to New York by the way of Watertown and Rome. Now I assume that the railroad didn't go from Plattsburgh to Albany, because that's a rough section down through there to build the railroad. And I don't think maybe it was built back in the
Well, it went to Utica, right?
Yeah, they went.
I know one of the early spurs went down toward Utica.
It went west, east-west. You know, it was the OLC or the Northern Railroad, whatever it was called at that time. It went east-west. That's why when you talk to people about the Underground Railroad, they talk about catching the train up here because there wasn't a north-south train at that time.
Right.
That's right. That's what I thought. The railroad wasn't built.
Well, there you go. The railroad's connected with all kinds of history.
The city went by Watertown and Rome to New York, you know.
Yeah, by way of Rome and Watertown, landed in New York City in the night and stayed one day, marched down Broadway the next night on our way to Washington.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great story. I've got to read this sometime. Yeah. I've got to read this sometime.
Today.
Oh, you want to read some of it now, or? Now is that a family photograph?
Yes.
What is that, Richard?
A family photograph.
John Moore's family, right?
Yeah, John Moore's family. John was born in 1813, I think.
My
and
goodness.
his wife was born in 1815.
What a crew. She almost looks like an Indian lady there.
Yes, and this is the oldest boy, James. He's
The
born
guy in the middle.
1841. Then this is Walter, born in 44. And this is Tom, born in 45.
Walter's the one over here. There.
Walter.
I've got the picture up here.
Okay, it's on the right-hand side as you're looking at the picture.
Mm-hmm.
That's Walter. I see his name there.
This is Tom.
Tom is the little boy in the middle.
Yeah, then this is my grandfather, born
Way over on the left-hand corner.
Born 1850.
So that's John.
And,
John?
Joe.
Joe, I mean,
Yeah.
okay.
And
John Thomas is the one with the beard.
well, no, I'm sorry. I said this is Tom.
In the very middle.
Yeah, Tom. This is the youngest boy.
And the little boy next to him
William.
to the right.
William, and that's the only girl they had, Mary.
And Mary's down on the
Yes.
bottom. So when would this picture have been taken, do you think?
I'm not sure. Well,
Around that time,
he was born 18. The youngest one was born in 1858.
So there you
what's
go.
he look like? About 8 years older?
Yeah,
maybe,
so we're talking almost
maybe-
Civil War time.
Maybe
then.
1866,
Yeah.
67, along in there.
Oh, isn't it? I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. These things are so cotton
Yeah.
and neat. So who gave you these?
Kelly Gibson gave me this picture, and one of that house too. You know.
Now you've known Kelly for years,
Well,
right?
yeah, I worked. Well, yeah, I went to Kelly's father to work when Kelly was 6 years old, and I stayed until he's 26. So I stayed until he's 26. So I knew him pretty well.
Did you? Oh my
Tell
God.
us who he is.
Huh?
Yeah, tell us about Kelly Gibson. Who is he?
Well, he's the father of the Gibson brothers. You know.
Yeah, we know that, but our audience may not know that.
Yeah, okay.
They're when I talk about salt of the earth in the North Country, of course, I always talk about farmers,
Yeah.
and I always talk about Kelly Gibson and his wife
Yes.
and their wonderful kids and how
Oh.
they nurtured them, and like you did.
Yeah.
You go to all their ball games, you go to all their concerts. You're proud of everything they do, and
Oh,
how
yeah.
many concerts have I been to where Ma and Pa Gibson were sitting there with big smiles on their faces, very, very proud of those kids.
Oh yes.
Because the Gibson brothers, as far as I'm concerned, #1 bluegrass
Oh boy. Yeah.
band in the world,
They're great. Eh?
and they're just absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And can it be true that there will not be a bluegrass
Lake
concert
Champlain Bluegrass, yeah.
this year. My goodness, well, I'm going to have to get into that. Somebody sent me an email.
Oh,
Richard Cook.
Richard Cook,
Oh.
sent me an email, said, for political reasons, there won't be a Lake Champlain Bluegrass Festival in Vermont this year.
huh.
So I got to, here we are blabbing about it on television. I hope they can resurrect it, because
Yeah.
we're doing this toward the end of May.
Yeah.
And for those people who just turned the show on, we're talking with Richard Moore in Ellenburger Depot about his ancestors in the Civil War. So you really didn't start getting into this.
No, I didn't until just a few years ago, you know. When he sent me all this stuff here, you know.
But he found about you. He knew you were on the face of the earth.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And he's out west somewhere, you're
Yeah,
saying.
Colorado.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So have you corresponded with him since then? Does he?
No, he wanted to know something. My brother was here from Scotia, and my brother called him one night, and they talked a long time.
Oh, he did. So
yeah.
you know his number.
Yes,
and all.
yeah.
So
yeah.
he's still hanging in there, huh? Doing the
Well,
research.
that was a few years ago. I'm not sure if he's still living or not, but yeah, there's an awful lot of descendants off from Tom Moore out there, you know.
There's a-
Like I just showed you, 3 pages here. You
Oh
know.
my goodness!
Yeah.
What great information! You got some more pictures, and we're going to show. Are those the only 2 pictures?
Yeah,
you
those
got?
are the only 2 pictures I got.
Okay, that's pretty nice.
Yes. Oh, yes.
To
I
have
guess.
that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there's pictures in that newspaper article right there. Where'd they get those? Open it up.
Oh, they got Walter and Thomas. Those are from
Oh,
that. That's
they
right
must-
from that photograph.
Yeah, they took
Okay.
it.
You
they
can
took
see him right in here. They took
Oh,
him
yeah.
right off the photograph.
Yes.
Okay.
Ta-da!
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, that's wonderful. And there'll be more of these. As I said before, our friend Frank Papp's wife, Ann, has some letters. We've already done a show with Dr. John Southwick
Yes.
with the letters that he had. You've got also some letters.
Oh,
right?
yes, yes. I got letters here that Tom wrote. I thought Tom wrote them all, but Walter wrote one of them, I guess. And they seem like they wrote them while they're in the hospital all the time. Now, I don't know. Somebody's got the original. Now, these things...
Careful on the mic here.
Okay. Now, I copied these all over because they were photocopied, and you can see how hard it is to read
Oh
them.
my goodness, without my glasses I could
Well,
never...
I went through the whole bunch of them and I rewrote it. And
Did
there-
you really?
Yeah, and there's some places here where it's something I couldn't see, you see, you know.
Yeah.
And they always started out, my dear father and mother, it is with great pleasure that I write these few lines. And a lot of times they say, I now take pen in hand, you know, when they start
Isn't
out.
that funny? We see that in the old literature and
You do,
stuff.
yeah.
Well, I'd like to have you read one of those letters for me.
So,
who are these from? Are they all from...
This one here is, this was from Walter, I think this first one was.
And there's
Yeah,
is
from
there,
your loving son, Walter.
is there a date on each one, Rich?
Yeah, I put the date up here. This is on December 1st, 1863.
All right, read the whole
My
letter
dear
for me.
father and mother, I'll have to skip a little bit because I couldn't make it out.
That's all right.
And it is with great pleasure that I write these few lines to let you know that I am well at present and hope this will find you all the same. Well, Father, it is a long time since I have had a letter from you. About 2 weeks. I want you to write once a week. Then, while Thomas is in the hospital, it will be blank, blank, blank for both of us. I have been to see him today. He don't gain very fast. He has had a shake every day for 4 days. That's right. And about be off with it. I have had 2 shakes in the last week myself. I don't know what shakes are.
What if they got
Shivers.
shivers and
Maybe,
shakes and
maybe, yeah.
maybe the fever and the...
Yeah,
Isn't that amazing?
I am quite well now. I feel lonesome to be without Thomas with me than I would be away from home for 4 years. Captain Gray, it looked like Heinz. Heinz has your home have you home on a furlough.
Huh.
He will be gone for 30 days. You shot. He'll be gone for 30 days, if not more. George will well and send his respects to you, and tell Gibson's that I think he might write to me once in a while. Anyway, please give my respects to James and Margaret, and tell them that I will write to them the next time to Mary. Then blank blank blank. There's not any news to write, so I must bring this to a close by bidding you all goodbye. No more at present. Remain your loving son, Walter Moore. Write as soon as you get this, you know.
Now, think about what the mail service was like
Yes,
in the
yes.
mid-1860s
Yes, uh-huh.
compared to today when guys who are on the front lines can pick up a cell phone and dial home or get on.
Oh boy, I guess.
They get on what they call Skype on the
Yes.
computer, and they talk to each other face to face.
Yes.
These days,
Yes.
and back in this time, it took a long time for a letter to get there and a long time for a
Yes,
letter to get
yeah.
home. And some of these guys wrote at least once a week, some almost every single day.
Yes, yeah.
They get a bunch written, and they would mail them, and then after a while, they
Yeah.
get back home.
Yeah, this here's, the headline is Banks at Fort Gray, Plymouth, North Carolina, December 1st. Then they wrote May 20th, and they wrote quite often. And then June 1st. And, well, it says June 1st here again. But,
Richard, sadly, the guy who wrote most of these letters was killed in the war, right?
no, this, Thomas wrote that one, or Walter wrote that, but Thomas wrote all these. And they both came home.
And they both survived.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, that's great
And,
news.
Yeah, this here's Thomas Moore, that letter. And, yeah, I think Thomas wrote them all except one. Yeah, this is Thomas Moore. Yeah, and he's one went out west. And
Something else I should mention here, and that is the fact that a lot of these young men didn't have much schooling. It
No.
wasn't like they went to kindergarten, first grade
Yes, yes.
through 12th grade and graduated.
Mhm.
A lot of them had to work on the farms and
Oh,
only
sure.
went to school for
Yes.
1, 2, or 3 years,
Yes.
or very little at all.
yes,
So when you read the language and it seems humorous to people who've had a college education, that's because that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And they wrote a word the way it sounded.
I was a long time copying these because you read this and
I want to show one of these
And,
letters just so people can get an idea what they.
now it says
Look
up here in the
like.
corner on all of them. Now somebody's got the original. The
Yeah.
original in possession of Warren Giberson, 12/27/1988. Now he's got the originals, and they'd be easier to read. These photocopies are hard to read, you know.
Bless you for doing it. I don't know how you had
Well,
the patience to go
I
through all of
studied
this.
it because if you're gone, they put G-O-N, no E on it.
Oh yeah.
And I got done, D-O-N, no E on it, you know. You have to figure it out what they're saying.
We've got a crazy language.
Yeah, right.
And
Mm-hmm.
what many modern people don't know is that in Old English and in what they called Middle English, most of those little vowels on the end were actually pronounced.
Yes.
But they're not anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, yeah.
I think of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and the words sound so different to us now. And
Oh, yes,
you know, we
yes.
pronounce words different.
Yes.
Civil War letter written by Grandpa Moore
Now that was sent by,
from a hospital, July 1st, 1860. What is that?
64, I think.
64?
Yeah.
And we've said it before, but I think it bears repeating in case somebody is watching this program as their first of our Civil War coverage. There were a lot of guys from this North Country who went off to fight in the Civil War, and a lot of people don't think there was any involvement here in northern New
Hey,
York.
I
But
saw
guess
one of your
what?
programs a while ago
Yeah.
from Champlain. You interviewed a lot of the,
Oh,
and there's a lot of Civil War veterans from Champlain, Ross's Point, Shazy down that area. I didn't realize the many until I saw your
right,
program,
and,
you know.
and Saranac, and you know.
Yes.
But Thomas was he had a pretty good writing, pretty good script, didn't he?
Yeah, he did good penmanship there, you know.
So how many there are?
There were
number of
six.
These letters,
There were
six letters all told.
6 of them. Yeah.
You know, there might be more somewhere in a drawer
Yeah, could be.
or a
Yeah.
dresser
Yes.
or
Yeah.
a something.
Yeah.
But isn't it nice to have these in your hand and know that
Oh yes.
your ancestor,
Yeah.
your direct ancestor,
Yeah.
wrote that?
And they wrote them at a time when life didn't look too good. I don't suppose they didn't know if they were going to come home or not. You know what I mean. And so they wanted to keep close contact with their family at home. You know, and like he said here once, you know, I hadn't heard from you in 2 weeks. It sounds like that's an awful long time. You know.
Well, you know,
it was when you're sitting there.
You and I both remember different ways people communicated during the wars that we've lived through.
Yes.
In World War II, you remember V-mail.
Yes.
Remember V-mail, the
Yeah.
little V-mail?
Oh yeah.
What they looked like, airmail and V-mail,
Yeah.
victory mail,
Yes.
little tiny thing. They were, and sometimes by the time the letter got home, there were so many parts chopped out of it. You're
right.
lucky if you got "Dear Mom" out of
Yeah.
it.
Right. Yeah.
Because they weren't supposed to tell where they are. And I
Yes.
often wondered how they do that now with email right from the
Right.
almost right from the front where they're fighting. They go to the tent and
Yeah.
they can contact
See
home.
this letter here, he says, "Dear Father and Mother, I again take my pen in hand." They start a lot
I
of the
love
letters
it.
like that.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. Well, they had to take the pen in hand and they had to dip it into.
Yeah.
They had to dip it in some ink.
And he says the same thing here again now, you know.
Are there any interesting parts where he talks about what times were good or bad or tough or battles or?
No, he toward the end or something, he told about one battle there where a couple of thousand guys went out and only 1,000 came back, you know.
Well, how many times do you think
Yeah.
that happened during that
Okay.
Civil War? Lots of times where nobody came back. And the horses died right there in the
Yes.
battlefield with them.
Well, it says there has been some hard fighting done, and there is a lot of it to do yet. There is a lot of the boys sick. I don't think there were over 250 men fit for duty in the regiment.
That's another point that we like to bring up over and over again. A lot of the casualties from the Civil War were due to illness, not gunfire.
Yes, yeah. Mhm.
I mean, when he said he had the shakes, we could understand
Yes.
immediately what they were
Yeah.
talking about. They
Mhm.
probably had high fevers.
Yeah.
Just think of the bad water they
Oh,
drank,
yes, yes.
and you know, not always the best food, and
That's
especially
right.
when they were out
Oh,
in the
yeah.
field.
And they talk about laying out in the swamp for 2-3 days, you know.
Yeah, think
You know,
about it.
No place to get inside, you know. Told one place here, he said, one of the boys said he found a nice soft place to sleep out in the swamp that night, you know, nice and soft and felt kind of dry. He said, I woke up first the next morning and I went over to see what kind of place he had, and the reason why it was warm and soft, he slept on top of a dead Negro all night long.
Oh.
He didn't know it because it was dark, you know, but it just wanted a dry place, you know, so that's the way they slept sometimes, you know.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
Huh? So absolutely.
And they told,
sad.
he tells here about one place they dug a trench 400 feet long, 6 foot deep, 6 foot wide. Now that's a lot of work. And they put the bodies in 3 deep, side by side. They said they were
We
covered.
can't even comprehend that.
Yeah, they
can
were
we?
covered with nothing but the soil when they threw it in on top of them, you know. And, you know.
Well, you know, and that harkens back to the sickness. There were no sanitary conditions at all,
Oh yeah.
and people weren't. You know, when somebody died, they buried him. You know, because you had hundreds and thousands on the battlefield.
Oh yes, yes.
And they stayed there for 2 or 3 days.
Yes.
So the stench itself had to be
Oh boy.
incredible
boy.
when they
Yes.
went and picked these bodies up.
Yes, yeah.
They're too busy out there killing more people to get them properly buried.
I think maybe he tells about that in here.
Well, I want to read this.
About digging that big trench, you know.
There's a lot of it here, but I'll read a few paragraphs at a
Yeah,
time, and
yeah.
you and I can
Sure. Yeah.
can chat about it as it happens.
Yeah.
Because this is you know, we've seen how many Civil War movies, how many plays about the Civil War. This is first-hand stuff for the most
It
part.
is firsthand.
And you
yeah.
read those letters.
Yeah.
That's a guy who was sitting right there, and he did have his pen in hand and an
Yes,
inkwell,
he did. Yeah.
and the sad part of it is a lot of these guys that wrote the letters, the last letters like John Southwick had,
Yeah.
were not from the guy because he was dead. He was out of sight.
Yes.
His mother didn't know if he was alive or dead, and all of a sudden you hear from his commanding officer and then from the chaplain.
Yes.
And so there was a sad end to so many of those stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let me read a little. This is called Memories of the Civil War by Thomas Moore, and we are so fortunate that these people took time to sit down with pen in hand.
That's right. Yes.
And wrote a lot of this.
Yeah.
And my wife's ancestors did that.
Mm-hmm.
They were Vaughans, Vaughan, and
Yeah.
they were connected with the Battle of Plattsburgh and the Revolutionary War,
Yes.
and Benjamin Vaughan and a guy named Nathan Vaughan, and they would sit down and handwrite all the family history. They'd take it out of the old Bibles and so on. And some families later would actually publish that information in a little hard-covered book. And families in their little drawers have those little hard-covered books which give us a little bit of history.
Oh, yeah.
So we're lucky.
Yes.
And you're lucky this guy found you.
Yes, I
And
know.
I've got a second cousin
Yeah.
way out in Texas, Plano, Texas, who got a hold of me like we'd known each other. You know, she's 40 years younger than
Yeah,
I am,
yes.
but she's interested in. So here we are digging up pictures, just
Yeah.
like you did, sending information back and forth. And
Oh, yes. Yeah.
they work hard at it, these
Boy, I guess so.
these
I
genealogies.
guess.
All right, let's read a little bit of this. With my glasses the way they are. On the 15th day of September 1861, I was 16 years old. And in January 1862, I stayed away from my father's house and went to Plattsburgh, New York, and enlisted in Company K 96 Regiment NYSB to serve 3 years or the duration of the war.
Mm-hmm.
On the 2nd of March, my father came after me. You said this. My brother older than me was with him, and he had agreed with my father that if I didn't want to go home, he'd go with me. He didn't let me know about the plan. But just as the train was moving out of Plattsburgh, he stepped on. And between Plattsburgh and New York City, the captain gave him a suit of uniform and enlisted his name in the company books. He served 3.5 years in the Civil War and was never mustered into the United States service. Isn't that amazing?
Now, Thomas was 16 and how old was Walter?
17.
He was a year
Just
old.
a year apart.
Yeah. Born 44 and 45. Yeah.
And you know, it puts me in mind the stories I've read about the Second World War II, where 4 brothers would go into the service, and they all made it home.
Yes. Yeah.
They watched each other's back and
Yeah.
fought in serious battles, and all made it home. Of course, families were broken up then, and
yes.
later on they didn't allow more than 2 brothers to go into service at the
I
same
think that
time.
I saw a movie of the Sullivan brothers.
Yeah,
There was
Oh,
5
yes.
of them, and
I remember
four
hearing that.
was getting away, and they went back in to get their brother off the ship, and they all got killed. So I think that's when they kind of limited it to a couple to a family in the same unit or
Isn't that
whatever.
amazing?
You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing that movie.
Boy. So here we go. We went south from Plattsburgh by way of Rome and Watertown, and landed in New York City in the night and stayed 1 day and marched down Broadway the next night on our way to Washington. I saw more fireworks and heard more martial music than I'd ever seen or heard before in my life. It looked to me as a green country. It looked as if the city would be burnt up. Our next stop was in Philadelphia, where the ladies of that old patriotic city set us up a fine dinner. A lot of them talk about the
Yes.
dinner, the good food
Yes,
they get
yeah.
when they get there.
Yeah.
The first we had since leaving Plattsburgh. Our next halt was at Baltimore. Let's pause a minute. I'm sorry, my phone rang right in the middle of that. That's what that funny music coming out of my side was all about. Okay, our next halt was Baltimore. Baltimore was a rebel town at the time. About 10 days before we passed through, the 6th Massachusetts was mobbed in Baltimore. Quite a number of them were killed and wounded, but there was none of that when we went through, for the reason that General B.F. Butler had been placed in command. He had declared Baltimore under martial law and placed a battery of artillery on a hill just out of the city. He told these Baltimore people that if there was any more mobbing, he would pack Baltimore off the map. We know what he meant there, don't we, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the 16th New York Regiment got to Plattsburgh, New York, and was doing guard duty in Baltimore when we went through. They could have killed every man of us. We were not armed. Oh, our next town was Washington. We got there in the night. Mud everywhere. We were marched into a long shed, a good deal like our western cattle sheds, boarded up and down with board roof, with no halts, and mud about 6 inches deep for a floor. Wow. We had the privilege of lying down, sitting up, or standing up. If I remember right, most of us stood up. Next morning we were marched into another long shed with a table about 2 feet wide running through the center. The whole length of the shed for breakfast. We were forced inward, and in front of every man was a piece of bread and a piece of salt horse. Come on.
Horse.
Salt horse.
Piece of salt horse.
Yeah.
Never mind salt pork.
Yeah.
And a tin cup filled with coffee made in a kettle the salt horse was boiled in.
Must have been good.
Oh, well, we didn't eat much breakfast. He says.
I wouldn't think so.
But almost every man became homesick,
Yes.
to say the least.
Boy, I guess, huh?
Oh my. From there we marched out to what was known as Meridian Hill. There we went into camp, drew our first equipments of war, our tent, blankets, guns, belts, etc. We camped here for about a month and drilled. We were reviewed here by President Lincoln and Scott and George B. McClellan. It was at this time that Scott was retired from active service and George B. McClellan took his place as Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the Potomac. Right after this review, it's on this back page, we went to the field, marched out of the District of Columbia, crossed the Potomac on what was known as Clare Bridge into Virginia, and slept our first night out in the museum in the old city of Alexandria. From there, we went to Camp Winfield Scott in front of Yorktown, where we expected to fight the Battle of the War. This is written pretty well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, written very well.
Yeah.
Unless somebody did a little
I
editing
know.
later.
Yeah.
The rebels had Yorktown, and it was well fortified. It looked as if we could never take it. And at this time, the rebels' Merrimack had sunk every good boat we had in Chesapeake Bay. We had nothing that dare face it. She sunk the Congress and the Cumberland just a few rods from the dock at Newport News. Our company was sent to Newport News to guard some property, and I remember seeing about 10 feet of the mast of the Cumberland sticking out of the water. She had a crew of 700 men. These were dark days for the North, with Rebs in Pennsylvania and in sight of the capital, but it is darkest just before day. We've heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, the Army was busy chopping down the forest and building corduroy roads, in case nobody knows what they were.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Yeah.
made out of wood.
Yeah. Plank
Corduroy road.
Yeah.
We got a plank
Plank
road
road.
here.
But corduroy, I imagine they left them around, you know?
They left them around
Yeah.
corduroy, and sometimes they would cut them in half, saw them in half,
Split
but
'em
they
half.
couldn't.
Yeah.
And well, the old military, the old turnpike was corduroy, right? In the beginning,
I think it
it was
probably
a
was.
military
Yes.
road, sure.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
corduroy roads and placing siege guns, getting ready to take Yorktown. I think 1862 was one of the wettest years I've ever seen. If he lived around here in 2011,
I guess so.
he'd seen a little wet in April and May.
Yes.
We couldn't move a wagon, ambulance, or piece of artillery without first building a road. Calvin and I have seen those cannon, and you try to move those with a poor horse or 10 men or whatever,
Yeah.
and try to move them through 10 inches of mud.
Oh boy. Those things are heavy, huh?
But you who have read the history of the war will remember that the Monitor appeared in the Chesapeake Bay about this time and knocked the Merrimack out of business. How many times have we read about the Monitor and the Merrimack? Or disabled her, so the Rebs ran her to ground and blew her up. Now came the turn of the war in favor of the Union, according to my judgment. I've always had a great respect for John Erickson, the inventor of the Monitor. Knocking the Merrimack out gave us the water side of Yorktown, and we took it without firing a gun. I want to say, as I've often said before, that this country ought to build a monument to Erickson as high as the moon. We owe it to him for doing more than any other man to save our nation. The Rebs evacuated Yorktown on Saturday night, and at 5 o'clock Sunday morning we were after them. They made a stand at Williamsburg, where we had our first fight with the Rebs. Our regiment supported Belgium's battery of 20-pounders. They were brass guns and made more noise than any battery I ever heard. A 20-pound cannon's a pretty good sized piece of shot, as you can imagine. We drove them out of Williamsburg and fell across the Chickahominy River and made a stand at Fair Oak Station or Seven Pines. We followed them up. Our regiment was in Casey's division, which had the advance. We went right back to work to build breastworks, for we expected the Rebs would attack us, which they did. I remember my brother and I were detailed to build breastworks. Every time we lifted a shovel full of earth, the hole would fill up with water. Ever dig a hole like that?
Yeah,
Boy, and
right.
I dug lots of them building the air base up there. Fill up with water, the ground was so full of water. When we saw our regiment fall in line, we threw down our shovels and ran to camp, got out the guns, and fell in with the company. We supported the battery as we did at Williamsburg, but the Rebs overpowered us and we had to fall back to our reserve. But that night we had the same ground we had in the morning. We didn't have our tents and new uniforms that we expected to wear into Richmond. We all thought we were going to take Richmond in a few days for sure, but we didn't take it for a few years. Isn't that amazing? We laid here in the Chickahominy swamp for about 6 weeks without tents or shelter of any kind, or even a blanket or coat. Takes a minute for that to sink in.
Well, I guess.
Mosquitoes.
Oh yeah, think about it. They didn't have off in those days, did they?
No, I guess not.
We laid there in the wet ground like as many cattle, and oh, how it did thunder and lightning and rain. I'll always remember one terrible night when my brother and I tramped around all night thinking we might get under a baggage wagon or an ambulance anywhere out of the rain. But there was someone ahead of us everywhere we went. Our regiment was lying on a hillside where there were a few scattering oak trees. It was not daylight yet and still raining like 40. My brother and a cousin of ours, James Gray, laid down at the root of one of those trees and went sound asleep. I went and looked at them after the sun got up and the rain had stopped, and they were sleeping like two babies. The warm sun was making steam rise off them like a boiling cauldron. But this treatment and the typhoid fever, there you go, the typhoid fever caused us to lose a great many of our dear boys. We couldn't give them any kind of treatment. We only had one hospital tent with no cots or other fixings to make a sick man comfortable. I remember the sad look on the face of some of the boys when they'd come around and say, "Well, Tom, Charlie's dead," or Joe or Jim, as the case might be. Well, this was about the 25th of June, 1862. The Rebs had come at us again, and we started in on a 7-day fight, fighting all day and retreating all night. A large detail out of our regiment was put on picket and was taken prisoner. The army moved away without sending them notice to withdraw. The Rebs followed us for 7 days. We had a hard time saving our supply train, but we fetched them up with a twist when we got up to Melvin Hill. It's about a round hill 75 feet high. We placed a line of heavy guns all around its back, and that just high enough to shoot up over the first line. We placed another line of lighter guns higher up so we could shoot over the first two. On the very top of the hill there was a large white house, and on top of the house we had one of our signal corps.
Mm-hmm.
He could signal to the gunboats in the James River and tell them where to drop their shaft and shell. It was heavy timber here and they couldn't see the enemy from the gunboats. This man on top of the house could see over the woods and talk to the men on the gunboat. As soon as our ambulance and supply trains got in, out of danger from the shot and shell, we cut loose on the Rebs and we just moved them. It didn't take them long to get enough. And they went back to Richmond, and we went back to Harrison's Landing on the bank of the James River under cover of our gunboats. We laid there about 6 weeks. Lincoln came and reviewed what was left to the Grand Army of the Potomac. We moved from Harrison's Landing back to Fortress Monroe and left the whole country just where we began.
Yeah.
This is great stuff,
It is,
isn't
yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Because this is somebody who was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not some historian
That's right.
trying to interpret something that he
Yeah.
heard that some other historian had
Yeah.
written 20 years
Yeah.
before. We went
And a lot
from
of it's right into detail.
oh,
too,
right
know.
into you know.
Yeah.
You can picture it, can't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
You know, we laugh about it now, but
Yeah.
boy, that wasn't funny trying to
Boy,
sleep up,
I
trying to
guess-
sleep standing up.
Well, I guess not. You know.
We went from Fortress Monroe to Suffolk, Virginia, where we did some fortifying and made a few raids. We got to Blackwater from Suffolk. We went to Newborn, North Carolina. This was the winter of 1862 and 1863. From Newborn, we went on a raid through North Carolina to Kingston, Calshara, and Whitehall. Our colonel was killed at Kingston. Colonel Charles O. Gray, a fine-looking soldier and a fine young man. Major Burhans or Burns should have taken command of the regiment when the colonel was killed, but he felt so bad. They went to school together, and Major Burns refused to take command of the regiment. Our captain took command of the regiment and brought it back to Newborn, and Major Burns was dismissed from the service, it is said, because he wouldn't take command.
Mm-hmm.
When he heard the colonel was killed, he cried like a child. We laid at Newborn the rest of the winter. It was said when we came in from the raid that every man of the 96th Regiment either had a darky or a donkey to carry his equipment. Isn't that amazing?
Just point out this is their words, not ours.
These are their words,
Yeah,
of course.
right.
They're, of course, written
Yeah.
after the Civil War.
Yeah.
Rebel General Magruder came to Newborn and tried to scare us out, but he made such a poor fight of it that it was never mentioned. Major General Foster was in command at Newborn. From Newborn, we went to Little Washington, North Carolina, where the Rebs had a Massachusetts regiment. They were about to start out. We drove the Rebs off and sent all the rebel citizens through the picket line to their friends. They had just so long to pack up and go. From there, we went to Plymouth, North Carolina. Plymouth is just below Raleigh on the Neuse River. Here we built Fort Gray and did some other work. Our regiment was detached from the rest of the brigade. We're stationed at Fort Gray about 2 miles up the river from Plymouth. Brigadier General Wessel was in command here with headquarters in Plymouth. After we got Fort Gray completed, our regiment was taken out of our old brigade and strung along the Dismal Swamp Canal. This canal runs from Roanoke Island to Norfolk. Here's where we were lying when our first 2 years was up, and the boys had a chance to enlist for another 3 years and get a $1,000 bounty. Wow.
A lot of money back then.
You better believe it. They got a town, county, and state bounty and $400 each from the government. Our regiment nearly all re-enlisted. My brother and I didn't re-enlist. So we got no bounty and no furlough home. We had to stay in Dixie and do duty till the regiment came back. The Reds were re-enlisting at the same time when one would come home on furlough, and we fought it out. We'd go out and try and bring 'em in. We brought in a Yankee lieutenant one night. We went out and threw a guard around all the buildings and then went searching for him. We found him in a closed carriage. He had his revolver in his hand but claimed to be asleep, so we had no fight with him. We brought him into camp, and his mother came to see him the next morning. We asked her for some money. She wanted to know how much we wanted. He said, $20 in gold. She said, I will not give you gold. The Yanks would have to take their own bluebellies. She meant greenbacks, bluebellies.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? When the regiment came, the Army was reorganizing at Yorktown. We were put into the 24th Army Corps under Major General B.F. Butler. Our army was known as the Grand Army of the James. We went up the James and landed at Bar Harbor and City Point. The Appomattox flows down from Petersburg and empties into the James between City Point and Bar Harbor. We landed at Bar Harbor and made our first start for Petersburg. It was one of the hottest days, I think, I've ever seen. Our company was in the rear guard and had to do lots of running after men that had fallen and urge them forward to their companies. Quite a number were sunstruck. You can imagine.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the worst deaths a person can die. Trouble is, all in the head. The trouble is all in the head, and they have such awful spasms. We had to fight for every inch of ground from the James River to Petersburg. I saw dead and wounded men at the Point of Rocks River, or Point of Rocks after the second day of fighting, more than I've ever seen before, or after, or during the war. Point of Rocks is the Appomattox River. This is where the field hospital was established, and all the doctors got together here, and the wounded were all brought here for treatment. There was a large house here and about 5 acres of an orchard and a large garden patch. The wounded were brought in and placed in rows under these trees till the whole 5 acres were about covered. Picture that.
Yeah, I guess.
There were two, oh, here it is. There were 2 amputating tables, about 150 feet long each. I don't know just how many surgeons there were. I don't feel as if I wanted to stay long enough to count them.
Yeah.
Between those tables there were wheelbarrows about 30 feet apart. The Rebs were thrown onto it. The wheelbarrow was full, it was wheeled off, and the contents dumped into a hole and brought back to be filled up again.
Yeah.
They talk about cruel war. I saw one of the surgeons stick his knife into his mouth where he tied an artery. It staggered me at the time, but I got used to such scenes. Wow. At this same place, they dug a trench 400 feet long, 6 feet deep, and 6 feet wide to bury the dead in. You told me that. They laid them in what was called hids and paints till they were 3 deep, then dug another trench. There were 3 brothers, 2 belonged to our regiment, 1 to the 118th New York. 2 of these 3 brothers and John were killed, and Joseph saw them lay in the trench like so many cattle without a blanket or anything but the dirt for a covering. It very nearly broke poor Joseph's heart.
I guess, eh?
Wow, Richard. Right there, I want to mention a little incident that took place about 2 months later. One Sunday evening, when the bands got out to serenade at General Headquarters, we were lying quite close to the Rebs. Their bands were out playing their kind of music, and we were playing our kind of music. But to wind up, they both played Home Sweet Home. I can never tell you what an impression that old tune made on the men, especially on Joseph, as both of his brothers were younger than him. He said, I didn't feel as if I could ever go home and meet my mother and leave those 2 boys in the trench at Point of Rocks, West Virginia. Anyone that can see anything glorious in that will have to explain it to me. We crowded on towards Petersburg, fighting for every inch till we got there. We could look into the city, and that's as close as we ever got. Petersburg was well fortified. We used to have to fire 100 rounds of cartridge every day just to keep up a continuous fire. It was here we dug a tunnel and blew one of their forts, but the scheme didn't prove a success. The orders were for every man to be ready till the fog lifted. Every man was to shoot in that direction, and we had 500 pieces of artillery all cut loose at once. I want to tell you we made a racket if we didn't hold the fort. about this time. Our regiment was taken from this line long enough to go to the wilderness to fight, and almost half of them never came back. One volley from the Rebs took down 7 of our commissioned officers, and I don't know just how many men. This fight was mostly in the woods, and the woods took fire, and lots of our boys that were wounded and couldn't walk were burned to death.
Yeah.
I read about that in so many of the battles around Gettysburg,
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
burned to death in the woods.
Yeah.
It was awful. I always thought Grant let the Rebs lead them into a trap. We didn't take a thing, never held a foot of ground. We went back to the breastworks in front of Petersburg with about half the men we went out with. We were taken out of the Petersburg line again one night about 12 o'clock, crossed the James on a pontoon bridge and made the first attack on Richmond, started to drive in their pickets. About 4 o'clock in the morning, the 10th New Hampshire and 118th New York were on the skirmish line, them and 100 guns. Our regiment supported them. It wasn't daylight yet when the Rebs began to shoot at us. It seemed as if some of their guns must have been loaded for a month. When they would shoot, we could see a streak of fire about 10 rods long. We drove in their pickets and formed a line of battle about 2 miles from their sideline of works. Our regiment came square in front of Fort Harrison with 16 32-pound guns. We took a view of the situation. It looked as if we could make it. Our brigadier general, after a careful view of work, said, "You can take it, boys. There's nothing there but schoolboys and pickups," which proved it to be about true, he said. We weren't sent there with orders to take the fort, but then, to make a showing, Grant made a break at Petersburg. But the Rebs were watching Grant. All their force was there. We never could have taken the outline of works around Richmond with the force we had. About the 3rd shot from the fort killed our brigadier general. My brother was carrying the state flag and wounded before we went 50 rods. We lost the Johnnies. We lost one man, more than half out of our company, and being killed or wounded. The Johnnies made a mistake in letting us get too close before they opened on us with grapes and canister. That's grape shot and canister shot. The fort was on quite an elevation, and when they began to use grape and canister, they couldn't depress their guns enough to hit us, so they'd shoot over. When we got into the fort, we only got 18 prisoners, but we had no time to lose as their reinforcements were in sight. We turned those 16 32-pounders on them and brought them to a stop. Our regiment was drilled in heavy artillery, and it came in good play here. I've had the honor of firing a 32-pounder myself. We took Fort Harrison about 1 o'clock. General Grant was there in the fort about 5 o'clock and ordered us to hold it if possible, but to take all the heavy guns out and take them across the James River. Inside of the fort was a row of barracks, which we tore down and made breastworks. We were sure the Rebs were going to try to take the fort back, so we worked the rest of the afternoon and all night building breastworks. We didn't have shovels enough, so the boys used their tin plates or anything to handle dirt.
Yeah.
Tin plates digging
Yeah.
breastworks.
Right. Yeah.
Whoa! It was claimed by some of the prisoners we took that Red General Lee said the Yanks got to stay in Fort Harrison overnight. There'd be no use in us trying to take it back. And they found that Lee was right. About 2 o'clock the next day, they opened up on us with solid, so to try and knock our breastworks down. They seemed to know what they were made of. The shot came like hail for a short time. The lay of the country around the fort was very much like it is west of my house. The Republican River, now called the James River, is where they had a gunboat that had a raging fire on our line. All that saved us was the high bank of the river. They had to let their shells strike the bank. They didn't know where they'd land. The Rebs formed in line of battle behind a hogbacker hill, very much like it was west of 4th Street. We could see the tops of their flagstaff and hear the officers giving command, but we couldn't shoot them off the hill. When they began to come over the hill, our officer said, let 'em come closer. but the men wouldn't wait. The 118th New York and 10th New Hampshire wanted to try their 7-shooters, so we all cut loose. I was on the front rank, and Captain Patterson said to me, "Tom, if you'll do the shooting, I'll do the loading." I told him, all right. I did the shooting for Patterson, and our Captain Harrison had a large Navy revolver for which he had no holster. He carried it in his hand, and with that in one hand and his hat in the other, he began to holler, "Give 'em hell, boys! Sock it to them fellers!" Sergeant Sherrow had the flag that my brother had been carrying before he was wounded, waving it back and forth and hollering, "Give 'em hell, boys! Sock it to them! They can't come over!" Then when they got close enough, all the boys began to holler, "Throw down your guns and come in. Don't try to go back. Come in, men. Come in." 5 flags came in, and I think about 1,000 men came in and surrendered. The Rebs then opened up on us with a harder battery, and they got such a good run of our lines that they dropped their shells right among us. Some of the boys broke and wanted to leave the breastworks, but the officers drew their swords and told the boys to go back and stay with it. One of our sergeants told the boys in our pit to watch the shells. You can see a mortar shell, and if you watch for it, you can hear them whistle. I bet you can. He would point his finger at it and tell the boys where it was going to fall. Some of them would fall short and some go over. When he thought one was coming in our pit, he'd say, "That's coming here," and we'd all run out. When a large shell like they were throwing doesn't burst in the air, they don't do much harm. When they strike the ground, they generally make a big hail, so that's when they burst and pieces fly up. We had one man who fell on one of those shells and it blew apart. It blew his body apart 40 feet high and lodged it in a pine tree.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This man belonged to the 1st New York Injured and was laying out and remodeling the fort. We had to work 4 hours on, 4 hours off, night and day, making bomb-proof and turning the fort up to face the other way, what it did when we took it. The Red sharpshooters kept up a continual fire on us in the daytime. When a man was down in the ditch throwing up the dirt, he was a good mark for a sharpshooter. Every few minutes, some man would drop a shovel and say, "I'm hit," or fall and say nothing.
Yeah.
I remember one young man, when the officer had ordered him to come out of the ditch and change off with the man on top of the works, he said he wouldn't do it. The officer pulled out his revolver and shot the man and called a stretcher and had him carried away. This was no place to disobey orders.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
That was serious business.
Yeah, it was.
All war serious. After we got the fort turned and fixed up in good shape, our regiment moved down the line a short distance to where the Negro division of fighters were. When we took the fort, it was in the night when we moved. We had no tents. We just laid down wherever it happened. I said to my brother, "This must be a swampy place. The water seems to be close to the surface." We didn't have any roll call, so I stepped a little late. My brother came and said to me, "Get up, Tom. You're lying right on top of a dead person." This is what made the ground feel so soft.
Yeah.
Wow. And they talk about the Negroes were not buried for 3 days after they were killed, and then they couldn't be moved, so a hole was dug, and the Continental tramping over them and leveled them down, or the continual trampling over them had leveled them down till we could scarcely tell where they were. These boy, you said he was descriptive writing.
Yeah.
Told the story.
Yeah.
And you know, I have a vivid imagination, and these I can just see these.
Yes.
Just like a movie's going past my
That's right.
head.
Yeah. Yeah. I can too.
I've read a lot of things about the Civil War, but never read anything quite like this, Richard.
Yeah. Yes.
I think Providence brought us together today somehow, so that I would get a chance to read this, and I'll be affected by it. So we built our winter quarters on this ground, and Nels Bush of Company, it looks like Company O, maybe CT, Connecticut, one of those men, he called them darkies, that's his language, in the tent. And when a new recruit came to the regiment, Nels took great delight showing him by throwing a little piece of dirt off his head. Isn't it amazing? What a different world
Yeah,
it was back
yeah.
then. The recruit would go out horrified from there. We went to the Fair Oak ground where we fought the Rebs in 1862. Here we ran into a trap. Our colonel lost his leg and Captain Harrison the flag. I've told you of this. You know, we talked about those amputation tables.
Yes.
You know, there was not proper anesthetic.
No, there's probably no anesthetics at all
Yeah.
back then, you know. They just cut
They
your
took
leg
a
off.
saw and cut the arm or the leg off.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah.
We left camp about 5 in the morning and got back to camp about 10 o'clock at night with less than half the men we had in the morning. The commissary had drawn whiskey for the men. That's probably, they had a shot of whiskey
That's
maybe.
about all the anesthetic.
Or the number of men we had in the morning. When the sergeant found that there were so many men gone, he just told the boys to help themselves. We had the most drunk men I ever saw. I told my brother that night if the Rebs would come in on us now, they'd take the whole line, and I'm sure they would have. I forgot to tell you that the next morning after the Rebs tried to take Fort Harrison back, I went on picket to relieve the sharpshooters who'd been there since the day before. We had a lively time. This same Captain Harris was in command of the picket line. We formed in line behind our breastworks and ran out to a given point and threw ourselves down on the ground to lay there for 24 hours. This same hill or hogback was between us, the Rebs on one side and us on the other. As we went out, we passed over the killed and wounded from the day before. See what I mean?
Yeah.
They didn't get a chance to care for their wounded or to bury their dead for 3 days.
Yeah.
On account of the incessant sharpshooters. Then a flag of truce was hoisted, and we agreed to have no more sharpshooting till an attack should be made by one side or the other. After about 3 months of ordinary camp life, we went to Fort Harrison and on Choffin's Farm in Virginia. The 96th Regiment, New York SV, marched into Richmond without firing a gun, and the Great War was over.
Yeah.
The end. No wonder you read it several times,
Yes.
Richard.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you reread it and you pick up something you didn't get the first time, too, Yeah.
You know, there a lot of that stuff I didn't know, a lot of the stuff you do know,
Yes,
because
yeah.
there've been a lot of television documentaries
Oh, yes.
about the Civil War.
Yeah.
But when you read it here,
Yeah.
it painted a whole picture
Yeah.
in my mind that I will never
Yeah,
forget.
that's right into detail. That's quite something, isn't it?
So you grew up around here, ran a farm, raised a family, and never knew this stuff.
No. Until
Or if you had heard these names, you never paid attention to it.
no, that's right. No.
Until how many years ago? 15?
Maybe 15 at the most, And it's mostly since this Dallas Briggs sent all this stuff from out west, like all the information I got here,
Well, what we're going to have to do, you've whetted my appetite here. Like steak and eggs for breakfast
Yeah.
after milking the cows.
Yeah.
So I might have to take his name with me, write it down, and see if I can find him. There are ways of finding people.
Yeah.
You don't have his address, probably, maybe. But you can use white pages from almost any place in the country and find a person's telephone number. I got the microphone here.
Okay. Well, this is
But so what other kinds of stuff do you have?
this is letters I rewrote. We just went through.
Yeah,
went through then.
I'm glad you did that, and I'd just like to take a moment to pause right here and to tell our viewers, Richard, that if they have any material like this,
Yes.
we'd love to know about it, because this commemoration of the sesquicentennial of the Civil War will go on for some time throughout the year, and there will be celebrations. We just went to a Civil War reenactment recently on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, sponsored by the Clinton County Historical Association,
Mhm.
that told us indirectly about you up
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
And so we'll do a lot more of these programs. So if you have pictures, and that's one good thing about that Civil War time. Matthew Brady and others were taking photographs by the hundreds of thousands.
Mhm.
So a lot of those photographs survive. And some of those television documentaries on PBS showed all those old photographs.
Yes, yes.
We don't. Besides the photographs you showed me, you don't have any other old tintypes or
No, I don't. That's it.
of the family.
Yeah.
And nobody else wrote about these ancestors that
No.
you know of.
Not that I know of. No.
Well, maybe you'll get them out of the woodwork.
Yeah. And I might have some information on Dallas Briggs. I don't know if he gave me his address or not.
Well, let's stop the camera for a minute and we'll talk about it. Oh yeah, well, we did find his name and address. We did find his telephone number.
Yeah, okay, that's
And
good.
if he's still among the living, he's going to
Yeah,
hear from
yeah.
Gordy Little, I'll tell you
Yes,
that.
yeah.
Because he wrote to your sister, Elsie Oliver, 30 Academy Street, Malone, New York,
Yes.
June 3rd, 1990, 21 year ago.
Yes, right.
And it gave a whole pile of information. That must be where the first contact was, right?
Yeah, it says Mr. Gibson said you were related or are
Oh, there you
more,
go,
you know?
see?
Yeah.
Those Gibsons take care of you,
Yeah,
Richard.
oh yeah. Well, we're all related, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Because, John Moore, my great-grandmother was a Gray, and Gibsons were Grays, you know. They married into
Well,
the
we're
Grays.
all kissing
So
cousins.
Kelly's grandfather, his name was John Gray Gradstone Gibson. He put Gray
Oh,
right in
my
his name.
goodness,
See?
come
So,
on.
yeah, we're all related, you know.
How's that for a famous name,
Right,
huh?
yes.
Okay, now what do you got here?
That's when my great-grandfather was discharged from the service, the British Army, you know.
Really? What does it say?
Well, it's just a copy from the discharge of John Moore, my great-grandfather, form number 3. Parchment certificate, Grenadier Regiment
Oh, boy.
of Guards. Corporal John Moore, born in parish of Heath, near or in town of Bicester, county of Oxford, enlisted at Brackley Grenadier Guards, 11th December 1835.
Oh, my goodness.
At
Is that
age-
cool?
Yeah, at age of 20 years, 8 months, served for 5 years and 169 days. Discharged in consequence of being unfit for further service, he got married. Now, apparently, they didn't want any married men in case he got killed. They'd have to pay their spouses, you know. It must be-
Guess what? I bet you your son doesn't know it, but when I was a young kid, the troopers couldn't get married.
Oh, they couldn't.
No, I
Okay.
lived right up the road from the Troop B barracks, which were in Malone at the time.
Okay.
And the guys had to be single, and they stayed in the barracks. Later, they allowed them to get married. But
Yeah.
isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it says signed by Ed Clive, commanding officer, major of Colonial, Montreal, May 31st, 1841. Character, general character, that of a good and efficient soldier, trustworthy and sober, and that he has never been tried by court-martial.
Well, that's nice to know. When you get mustered out, that you never had a court-martial.
Yeah, right.
Well, you got some good stuff here.
Yeah, oh yes, yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised that after your friends, the Gibsons and others, see this program, Richard,
Yeah.
that people come out of the woodwork and give us some new material.
Perhaps.
Maybe you'll get new
Yes,
material.
perhaps, yeah.
And if you do, you have to let Calvin know.
Yeah.
Our thanks to the Clinton County Historical Association for tipping us off on this program.
Well, I thought advertised in the paper, and I thought this is all over down, see if I got anything that they'd like, you know, and
Oh, of course they do. And this
And,
is the year to bring it out. And
yes.
we try to promote history all the time, not
Yes.
just during bicentennials and sesquicentennials and so on.
yes.
But it's nice to have even copies of things.
Oh,
And
yes.
When
yes.
I started to do research on my father's family that came from Ireland and Scotland before that, we've uncovered a lot of stuff thanks to the same kinds of people who love to do this kind of research.
Yes, yeah.
It's nice to have.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Now, well, let me ask you this question before we wrap this up. Richard, did you go to schools right in this area?
No, Ellenburg.
You went to
Yeah,
Ellenburg,
that's where I went.
the old school.
Yeah. Well, I quit in 10th grade February, and at 16, I got out and earned a living, you know. I was in 10th grade.
As so many people do. We
Yeah.
talked about that before, but that's right up through to the last century.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't go past 16. But look at the education life has given you.
Oh, yeah, yes, that's right, yeah. Now, I started school right in where Kelly used to live, right in his yard.
Come on, an
I just-
one-room schoolhouse?
Yeah, Somebody just sent me a picture of that. Oh, I just put it in the other room.
Yeah.
Picture of the one-room schoolhouse right on the corner of Gibson Corner, you know.
Oh,
it
yeah.
burnt in 41, then we had to go to the big school, you see.
There you go, the
Yeah.
big school.
Yeah. And boy, that was a nerve-wracking day. I remember so nervous, so many kids around. You didn't know anybody, you know.
Isn't that scary? Going to the big school, you know.
It was scary.
You just opened the floodgates of memories for me, going from my little school, Messina Center, to Messina High School as a freshman.
Oh, yeah.
I was petrified.
Yeah, sure.
That
Yeah.
school was probably only about twice as big as this house, and it's gone. Every school I ever went to was torn down
Yeah,
a long
Yeah.
time ago.
yeah.
Great memories.
Yeah, my sister sent that picture down a while ago from Malone of that school over there. I never had one before, you know.
That's wonderful to
It
have
is,
and keep.
Yeah,
I got some great school pictures of mine.
yeah.
Richard Moore, you're a super guy.
Huh.
These people that we started talking about today were your ancestors. What were their names again? The Moores that fought in the Civil War? Mention their names again.
Oh, Tom and Walter Moore.
Okay.
Yeah,
And those letters we read, this account by Thomas More is now
yes.
indelibly imprinted on my mind
Yes.
forever and ever and
Yeah.
ever. I'm so glad I came here today to
Isn't that-
read it. And if you found us chuckling about some of these things that happened during that time period, it's only because history has dulled our senses. Those weren't fun times
No,
for the
boy,
most part.
I guess not.
Not at all. And a lot of our boys from the North Country were very, very much
Yeah,
involved in
and
the Civil
it's
War.
hard to imagine how the family at home was worried all the time too. You know.
Well, you didn't have
know?
instant access.
Yeah, I know.
You didn't have television. You didn't have 15 news networks
know.
on your TV
Didn't
telling
have-
you what was happening. You didn't have reporters embedded with the troops.
No
as they
idea
said.
what was going on.
No,
you know,
not a
you
clue.
know? Yeah.
Not a clue.
It must
As
have-
we proved over and over, many families didn't know their boys were dead for months.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Sometimes longer than that.
Yeah.
The bodies were buried without ever having been identified. They had the forerunners of dog tags back in those days,
Yes.
but you know,
Oh, yes.
talk about the horrors of war.
Yes.
You talk about bodies that were blown up and ended up in a tree.
Yes.
You know, there
Well,
wasn't much identification going on
Yeah, boy,
probably
boy.
after that. Well, this has been a learning experience,
Yeah,
but you know what? Every day is a learning experience for me.
Yeah, that's right.
I
Yeah.
met another wonderful person.
Yeah,
You're the best. I'll
Well,
never forget
thank you.
that deep voice of yours.
Yeah.
Just think, you could have been, instead of milking cows, you could have been on the radio all these years. And I could have been running the farm.
I guess so. Yeah.
What do you got there?
Well, this is some information that Dallas wanted to know if I could fill in for him. You know, but you know.
They want,
Yeah,
that's
Joe's
like
a-
my cousin out there wants all the information about who did what, when. I
Yes.
felt like I was reading the Bible with
Yes,
who
yeah.
begat whom
Yeah.
along
but,
the way.
But I don't have enough information way back there to
Well,
help me out.
I'll
any
see
of
if I
that.
can find him and I'll let you know.
But you know, when I went down to the Historical Society and I told him about Tom Moore, and I says, I don't know just when he went to Nebraska, it was sometime after the Civil War, you know. One of the women got on her computer, you know. Oh, yeah, yeah. He moved to McCook, Nebraska, and he died in McCook, Nebraska. She got it right up on the computer just like that.
You know, the internet is a marvelous thing.
Yeah.
With a few keystrokes,
Yeah.
you can get yourself in deep trouble, or you can get all kinds of information
Yeah,
at your fingertips.
yes.
I love to do research, and you know I write a newspaper column and a lot of
Yes,
other
yeah, I see
things,
that.
and I
Yes, I
can
read it,
find
yeah.
I can find information in 20 minutes that used to take me 2 weeks
Oh, I would
of
be
going
surprised.
through the library.
Yes.
You'd have to go to a library.
See, I don't have no...
Oh, I know. My wife is
nothing
the
on
same way.
on computers at all, you know.
She doesn't,
No.
you know, I read her the email or make copies for her.
Oh, well,
But it
that-
is a marvelous thing. We live in an age of communication. We
Yes,
can
yeah.
find out things that we don't even want to know sometimes by just turning on the television
Yeah,
set and so
and,
on. Well, it's time to wrap up this program, my good friend. I want to shake your hand.
Okay, well, thanks.
I want to thank you for
Glad
allowing
guys
us to
came.
come and
Yeah.
sit at your kitchen table.
Yeah.
I want to thank our friends out there who watch this program for doing just that, for telling your friends and neighbors about it, for viewing it on your local cable channels, for looking at it on the internet at Plattsburgh.com and HometownCableNetwork.com, for passing the word that what Calvin and I do is important.
Oh,
Because
yes,
it's
yes.
so
Yes,
important
it
to
is.
meet people
It is,
like
yeah.
Richard Moore and his
Yeah.
friends and others and to spread the word that we live on the nicest darn place in the
Yes,
face of
you
the
bet.
I'm not sure that the Garden of Eden wasn't located just west of here. Okay? You just never know.
Yeah.
And I wish she hadn't touched that apple.
Yeah.
Anyway, we appreciate your suggestions and your comments.
Right.
If you'd like to make a generous donation to help Calvin and me continue this into the
Yes.
future, please do that.
I have in the past.
We know you have, and we thank you. We're talking to the people
Well,
out there who can afford to send us those big checks of $10,000 or 89 cents, whichever comes first. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.